Hey everyone, let's talk about who's really in charge of a child's IEP. I've been writing IEPs for over 25 years. I've written IEPs in probably almost every state across the country. And this is a question that I get asked a lot because there's a lot of confusion about who's in charge of the accountability of a child's IEP. If you've ever struggled with figuring out who's accountable for what, I want you to go ahead and comment below. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to hit subscribe so you get every free training that I'm putting out here. Every week I'm live with you. Put your questions in the comments, and I'm going to be here delivering the truth about special education, because too often there's a lot of misconceptions, a lot of misunderstandings, a lot of confusion about what's right and wrong. And that goes back to who's really in charge of a child's IEP. If parents feel helpless and teachers feel helpless, then what's going on? Because parents think teachers should be in charge. Teachers are like, only so much I can do behind the scenes. And I know that as a fact, because I'm a former special education teacher. I was in the classroom. I was writing the IEPs. And you know what? I felt lost. I felt like I was on a special education island. I was thrown onto that island, and it was kind of like, good luck. You have your degree, you're ready to go. I didn't know the chain of command as a teacher. And you know what? That's really awkward as a new teacher. And you know what? Even seasoned teachers, they've switched classrooms. They don't know the dynamics of the school or the district that they've moved to. The chain of command can be confusing. Parents, it's absolutely reasonable for you to be thinking, why is this so hard? Like, there's a document, it's a legal document, it's not a choice, like we have to follow it. So who is really in charge? The bottom line is, and you're not going to like this answer, but I'm going to give you some tips on how to get to a real answer for yourselves. Bottom line is, it's different everywhere. Now, yes, the government created a law. There's a federal law that says all of these things have to happen, but laws are written to be interpreted, and how that's interpreted can be different. State to state, district to district, school to school. So if you've ever struggled with who's accountable for this, who's in charge, and you can't figure it out, and you don't know why it has to be this hard, you're not alone. Okay, so let's talk about, we have this federal government that wrote this law. I don't know, do you say IDEA law or IDEA? There's a whole discussion happening on Instagram right now on which one do you say. I always say IDEA law. That's how I grew up in special education, is that it was IDEA law. Okay, so IDEA law, federal. Then your state has its own laws, and they are absolutely listed all over your state's education website. And then your district has policies, rules, guidelines, not laws. And then your school has what I call habits. They could be good habits or they could be bad habits. But bottom line is, you have to figure out from that federal law down to sitting at that IEP table or even the everyday classwork, who's in charge in between all of this in your specific situation. Now, notice I didn't say who's leading the IEP, because I can tell you right away, parents, you should be leading the IEP, not with anger, not with demands, with your parent input statement that's inside of the IEP. Every IEP has a section for parents to have a very strong parent input statement. So parents can be leading the IEP, but then how do we get to this accountability? Who's in charge? Who makes sure that this gets done? So let me just tell you from my own perspective. Remember I said I was that teacher, that I was on an island. Really, I've told this a million times, but I walked into my first classroom. It was empty. Some tables and chairs. There was a milk crate with a bunch of IEPs stacked up in it. And it was like, figure it out. That was it. So if I figure it out, let's just say I do a good job figuring it out. I did do a good job figuring it out. Okay. So I did a good job figuring this out. Do you think anybody was holding me accountable to what's in my classroom? I really want to know. So I'm a teacher who walks in, I've got the IEPs, and I'm doing a good job. And by good job, I mean parents are happy. Nobody's emailing my boss. And, parents, they thought they knew what was happening in my classroom. Quite honestly, they knew a lot of it, but there's no way for parents to know everything that's happening in the classroom. And I bet you the parents of my students thought that somebody was checking in on me. Guess what? They weren't. The only time that I saw my advisors when they came in and they did, or my special education, it was assistant director, they'd come in to do my teacher evaluation to see if I was doing a good job. So that happened once a year, maybe twice a year. That was it. As long as the parents were quiet and nobody was telling anybody anything negative about what was happening in my classroom, all was good. So we made the next IEP and we'd move on to the next school year. So who's really in charge of making sure that there's accountability? Quite honestly, it's the parents. The parents have to make sure that everything is accounted for. That's exhausting. It feels unfair, right? It feels unfair that a parent has to do that. So it's really important, and this is the step that I want you to take. It's really important that inside of the IEP that you understand, and by you, I mean you, whoever you are, parent, teacher, admin, or therapist. This works for everyone. This is a master IEP coach method. This is what I teach inside of the master IEP coach mentorship. This is what I teach inside of the special education inner circle, is that you have to ask for each piece of the IEP, who's in charge and who do I go to if I have questions about this. Now, as a team member, this may not happen out in front at the IEP meeting. I totally get it. You're not going to sit there with the parent sitting there and the big boss sitting there talking about, okay, so who's going to make sure that's typically not how it goes. But parents, you absolutely can use time at the IEP meeting to figure out, okay, we've got these goals. How do I get the data? How do I make sure that things are moving forward? Who should I go to if I have questions about this goal or that goal? Because some goals you might go to the speech therapist. Some you might go to the classroom teacher. How do I make sure that accommodations and modifications are being done? My goodness, let's talk about that. Accommodations and modifications are this big list of things. Everything from an extra set of books at home, to extended time on tests, to having directions read, to having worksheets modified, all of the things that helps a child access their education. We make this big long list. Who's in charge? Who's in charge of that list? You have to ask. So as a teacher, I was in charge of that list. I was a teacher in a self-contained classroom, elementary age, grades 1 through 3. That's where I spent most of my teaching years. I taught a little bit in junior high, taught a little bit. I was a permanent substitute, so full-time teacher, but I had no classroom. I went around and I did all the things in the special education classrooms when the teachers either weren't there because they were sick or there were IEP meetings happening. That was a really cool position because I got to see all the classrooms throughout the entire district from preschool to high school. It was called a co-op out here in the Midwest. We have co-ops in quite a few states. So I've seen a wide range of what happens behind the scenes in special education. And who's in charge is not a global question that has one answer. It's you have to ask and figure out that chain of command. You have to figure out who's in charge of making sure the accommodations and modifications are done. Who's in charge of making sure that the visuals are all set up, not just in the special education classroom, but that the visuals are set up in the gym, in the lunchroom, in the art room, in the library, in the hallway. When the child gets off the bus, who's going to make sure? You have to check on that. So although I don't have a one and done kind of answer for you, this is who's in charge of a child's IEP, I want you to feel confident knowing that there is not one answer and that this is something that needs to be clarified with every IEP, with all of the team members, to make sure that this document is being implemented, because the accountability looks different in every school, with every team, with every child. I also want to remind you, because I love to put this out there every time that I'm connecting with you, is to always remember that not only is a child's IEP supposed to provide an appropriate public education. We all know this, free and appropriate public education. We say the word FAPE for short. But it's also supposed to meet a child's unique needs and prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. When we say who's in charge of the IEP, we're saying who's in charge of making sure that a child is prepared for further education, employment, independent living. The team is in charge. Now, who is leading that team? Parents, you need to lead that vision. Who is making sure those goals are done? You got to ask about accountability. Who's making sure those accommodations and modifications are done? You have to ask your team about the accountability. How are these minutes being used in the IEP? How do we use the speech minutes, the PT minutes, the OT minutes, the resource minutes? You have to ask. It is not an assumption that somebody else, or you shouldn't be assuming that somebody else is holding somebody else accountable to make sure that this is getting done. So parents, I'm sorry to put this on your shoulders, but it goes there. Right now, it goes there. Now, teachers, I'm putting it on your shoulders though too, because parents are managing medical appointments and siblings and their spouse at home. They're managing all these different pieces. They've got a lot going on. You know the dynamics. Take that initiative and make sure that the pieces of the IEP that maybe you're not even in charge of, that somebody is in charge of them. I know that you have a lot on your plate, especially after this past year, but there is no one answer. And you know what? When we ignore this, when we ignore who is accountable for which pieces and we don't get it verified, we don't have a system in place for communication, that's when all the ugliness happens at the IEP table. Because I thought you were doing it. No, you were supposed to do it. No, I don't want to throw my colleague under the bus. Oh, why is this parent so mad? I thought you were talking to her. No, I thought you were talking. Stop. So who's in charge of the IEP? Figure it out. Be accountable. Develop a plan. Put the plan in writing. And yes, that part can go in the IEP too. All right, I'm going to jump over here because Veronica has a question. And she says, my daughter has Down syndrome. Should the eligibility say disability as opposed to developmental delay? No. So here's the thing. We have to remember that doctors diagnose and can label, right, a diagnosis. And in education, we just have eligibility. And your state has categories for that eligibility. And your daughter is qualifying under developmental delay. Your daughter's probably young. I think we can qualify developmental delay up until age 7, 8. And you have to make sure that that eligibility category is appropriate, but it doesn't have to encompass everything, meaning that a child could have autism and ADHD and an intellectual disability or developmental delay, however the school wants to put in those categories. And I'm looking over at your comment here. It says she's 4. Yes. So most children who have developmental delay, intellectual disability, a gap in their milestones are going to go under developmental delay. And when your daughter, developmental delay until 9, Wanda's saying. That's what I thought. I couldn't remember, 7, 8, 9, right around there. Been doing this for 25 years. And guess what? Sometimes they change things. And I Google up stuff too, just to make sure. So yes, Wanda, I knew what you meant, age. So Wanda is watching here. She's a master IEP coach. So we always help each other out with those finer details because state to state, things can vary too. So make sure that that is the right answer for your state. I'm never going to tell you that the number that I give you as in developmental delay up until this age is going to be the right number across all states. Reason being, let me give you an example. I'm going to jump ahead to transition planning. Transition planning needs to be for every child that's 16 and over. However, for example, in the state of Illinois, transition planning starts at age 14 and a half. So there's things state to state for accountability, for who's in charge of what happens next, that change. You have to ask. It doesn't matter if you're a seasoned teacher, if you are a seasoned administrator, therapist, or if you're a brand new parent. You have to ask and clarify because it's different all the time. All right. Kim is in the chat box talking all about IEP decisions are based on data. Yes, they should be. Often they are not. Remember, opinions are not data. So anytime anybody says, I feel, that's a red flag that we need to go grab some data. And it's absolutely true that we cannot make educated decisions if we don't have the data. We can make emotional decisions, but we really can't make educated decisions if we don't have the true data. Okay, everybody, that is all for today. I'm going to see you guys next week here for our free IEP training. Just remember, who's in charge of the IEP? If you hear yourself saying that, the answer is you got to go figure it out. You have to ask the questions. There's the federal law, there's state laws, there's district policies, there's school policies and habits. And somewhere in all of that, you have to take it. It's in that document and assign who is going to be accountable for what. How are we going to communicate about it? How are we going to follow through on it? Because nobody wants to be in that situation of, I thought you were doing it. And that happens all the time in special education. I want to encourage you all to head over to specialedinnercircle.com. That's exactly where we can continue this conversation, talk about who's accountable for your specific students and children, and make sure that you get the IEP that is needed to prepare a child for further education, employment, and independent living. I'll talk to you guys soon.